Hey, what's going on guys? Dillon DeJesus here, and today we're going to be walking you guys through a Jordan 1 custom sneaker tutorial. Now, rather than just going through how to do a Digi Camo theme, which we are going to be covering today, we wanted to do just a little bit of a longer style format type video, where I just want to cover kind of everything in a little bit more detail. Potentially, if you're finding us for the first time, I want to make sure that we don't skip out on too many things here, and we really walk through a lot of things that comes with customizing a pair of Jordan 1s. And if you've already seen a lot of our videos, hopefully I'll still be able to include some tidbits and little tips and tricks along the way that you guys can learn from. But now let's go ahead and dive right into working on a pair of Jordan 1s. We're going to be working with these white, black, and chili red Jordan 1s. The first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and unlace them, and then we're ready to move into some of our prep work. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm working with a pair of leather sneakers like this is move right into some of my sanding. And I'm going to begin sanding with 3 different grits of sandpaper. I'm going to be using a 400 grit, an 800 grit, and a 1500 grit sandpaper. I'm then going to attach all of these to a Ryobi detail sander. This is just going to help save some of that elbow grease that you would need to put in if you were going to be doing your sanding by hand, which is totally fine, but this sander will save you a lot of time. Being that we are working with relatively fine grits of sandpaper starting off at 400, I think a big concern that a lot of people may have is, isn't sanding going to potentially ruin my sneakers? And that's definitely not the case when you're working with this type of grit of sandpaper. 400 is already pretty fine. This isn't the type of sandpaper that you would find lying around in a woodworking shop or anything like that, or that your dad might have lying around in the garage. And then when it comes to these sandpapers, I just pick them up in a larger 8.5 by 11 sheet, cut them down into triangles, and then just use some double stick tape or form a little circle ball of tape to attach them to the detail sander, since you're not usually able to find any of the finer grits in the little adhesive pads that are actually made for these types of detail sanders. If there's any areas of the shoe that you don't plan on painting at all, it's totally okay not to prep those areas. So for this design, I'm going to be keeping our toe box white, so I'm not going to be doing any of our prep work directly on my white toe box. After I have all of my sanding completed, I'm going to move into scuffing up the surface just a little bit more by using a green Scotch-Brite pad. After we have that done, we're going to use a cotton ball and acetone or leather preparer and deglazer to pick up any of that residue that's left behind from the sandpaper or the Scotch-Brite pads. If you were just starting out and you were trying to use something more like a nail polish remover, that's not going to be quite as strong as using acetone or leather preparer and deglazer, so it's not going to do quite as good of a job at really removing that factory finish that's applied to all leather sneakers. Once we're done with those 3 basic steps of prepping, sanding, scuffing, and acetone, then we can move on to our taping process. So to begin, I'm going to be using Pro Tape's crepe paper in order to cover up a large portion of the sole. This is a very low adhesive tape, so it's not going to leave behind a lot of residue. And then for my actual hard line on the midsole, I'm going to be using green Scotch 2060 tape. So now that I have my shoes completely prepped, I have my soles taped off, I'm now deciding which panels are going to be taped off. And for this theme, I actually want to play with a matte versus glossy contrast. So some of the panels I'm eventually going to be applying a high gloss finisher on, and I want to have those completely taped off till I'm done with everything else and have actually applied my finisher. So this panel that wraps around the toe box, and then my 2 eyelet panels here, I'm going to have those taped off till the very end. And the reason for that is I don't want to coat the entire shoe once I'm done with the design with a matte finish and then apply a gloss finish on top of that matte finish on those panels. So I'm just going to have those completely taped off till I'm done with the rest of my design. Now let's go ahead and talk about some paint selection. I'm going to go ahead and throw a mock-up on the screen of what I originally had planned out for this design. And when looking at this Digi Camo pattern, all of the colors are actually quite muted. The saturation is toned down quite a bit. So, you know, the green isn't incredibly strong, the brown isn't super saturated or anything like that. And I think that that fits this type of theme really well. I don't want that green or brown to be too saturated because it would really overwhelm. And I think that if you just look up a lot of cool kind of Digi Camo style jackets or army jackets and whatnot, I think the saturation is toned down quite a bit for those colors. So now I want to walk you through that process of how you can kind of mute your colors a little bit. So starting off with my beige color first, I'm going to be using a mixture of around 80% beige taupe and around 20% light gray. Moving into my green color, I'm going to be using around 60% avocado, 20% beige taupe, 10% light gray, and 10% green. For my brown color, I'm going to be using 75% taupe, 10% beige taupe, and 15% brown. And then for my dark gray color, I'm gonna be using 40% light gray, 40% black, and 20% avocado. So everything that I just told you as far as those color mixtures go is completely a lie. Once I went ahead and actually started to lay some of these down, which I'll show now, these colors were still too saturated, even though I thought they looked pretty good. So I actually had to go back and still mix in at least another 20% or so directly into each mixture of light gray, which really helps mute these colors. And then you'll see down the road that all of our colors are much more muted, and it's gonna look a lot closer to the mock-up that I had initially done. Once I have my paint colors all set, in order to make sure that they're airbrush ready, we need to add a little bit of too thin into this mixture. So I'm gonna mix in around 20 to 25% too thin directly into my paint. This can change a little bit depending on how new your paint is. You may not need very much, but I think one of the most important steps is to run your paint directly through a mesh strainer. And this is gonna catch any old paint clumps just to make sure that those don't end up in your airbrush, which could potentially clog it. To begin our airbrushing process, I'm going to be using a Badger Patriot 105 airbrush, and for some of these preliminary base coats, I am going to have a little bit of extra white mixed into my paint color. This is just really going to help you kind of get a little bit more of an even look to your coverage. After a few light coats, things should start to look nice and solid for you. So something that can happen a lot when you're airbrushing, especially when we're not talking about on like white leather, so on this pair for example, we had that red swoosh. I've done 3 light coats with my beige taupe color, but you can still see a fair amount of that red peeking through. This can also happen in certain areas, maybe like by the stitching and whatnot, some of the white might be peeking through. So sometimes when I know I'm almost ready for that final coat with the airbrush, what I might do is kind of do like a half coat in between, where I'm gonna go in with my paintbrush, and you apply more paint when you use a paintbrush rather than with an airbrush. So being that a little more paint is going to be applied, it's going to cover that up a little bit easier. So if I go ahead and kind of do an in-between coat here, you could call this, you know, coat number 3.5 with a paintbrush, just in areas where there's a lot of red or white peeking through. It's going to cover up really nicely, and then I know that I'll be able to do a really clean 4th coat with an airbrush. The thing that you wouldn't want to do is wait till you're done with, you know, maybe 4 to 5 coats with an airbrush, and then go back and see some spots and say, okay, let me go back and try to touch those up by hand, because it's really hard to get areas that you've painted a solid color with an airbrush to match areas that you're going to touch up with the paintbrush. Those areas with the paintbrush are always going to come out a little bit darker because more paint is applied. So if you kind of do it as an in-between coat before you're ready to move into your final coat with an airbrush, it's just what I found works really well to always make sure you have a nice even coverage all the way around. After that in-between coat that we did by hand, I'm ready to move into my final coat with the airbrush, and now we're gonna have everything looking nice and solid before we can move into our Digi Camo pattern. In order to do that pattern, I'm gonna be using our new Digi Camo stencil, and as you can tell, there's gonna be a ton of options for you as far as variation goes when it comes to actually laying down this pattern. To begin laying down our Digi Camo pattern, I'm going to start off by using our green color, and then I actually like to start off using some of the larger chunks of the stencil. So although at first it may seem like, oh, here in this area, it looks like I'm applying a little bit too much green, that was too large of a green chunk, that's totally okay, because these areas are going to get covered up with other colors on top. I still know that I'm going to be applying the brown and the dark gray on top of some of these green areas, so it's okay to start filling this off in larger chunks to begin with. To really pull off a pattern like this, it's really all about having quite a bit of variation, so you definitely want to make sure that you're using some of the smaller portions of the stencil also. You can kind of pull yourself back, take a look at it, how everything's looking from afar, and try to decide in which areas everything's looking a little bit more empty, and then start to fill in some of those areas with the smaller portion of the stencil. Real quickly, I just want to touch on color selection and the order in which you lay colors when you're doing stencils like this. We're not just talking about the type of background stencil texturing that you might do where you just take your background color and you do lighter and darker shades of that color. When you're actually doing solid colors like these browns and greens on top of this beige background, the order in which I like to lay them, I just need to know my final color that I want to have on top. And that final color, I don't want it to be my darkest color or really my lightest color. So in this case, I have brown, green, and dark gray. That means I want that medium color, our brown, to be my final color on top. So I can do either my green or my gray first knowing I just want to do brown last. The reason for that is, let's say I were to do our dark gray last, being that that dark gray is going to then cover up all of our brown and green, it's going to overpower it a little and it's going to stand out a little bit too much. So you want to have a nice medium color be your final color, and that's how you're able to start deciding which colors in which order you're going to do them. Now moving into our dark gray color, just like we did with our initial green color, I'm going to begin by filling in some larger chunks of the dark gray. And even if some of these areas start to seem like, wow, I have way too much light gray there, again, we still know that we have our brown color to place on top. So it's okay to have these larger chunks. We're really trying to layer up this pattern. Another thing that you really want to keep in mind is always trying to make sure that essentially you have your stencil or your pattern perpendicular to the sole. If you rotate this stencil at all, now that pattern is going to be slightly rotated and it's no longer going to have as clean of a look. So you really want to try to keep this stencil or your pattern, if you're doing it by hand, totally perpendicular to your sole. And for our final brown color, we're going to be repeating a lot of the same steps and principles that we've already talked about with our other layers. Just give yourself the time to take a step back and start to really look at the pattern as a whole and sort of start to say, what areas do I need to fill in a little bit more? What areas need to be covered up a little bit more? What areas do I have a little bit too much green peeking through or a little bit too much gray peeking through? Or what areas do I still have some of our beige background peeking through? Really let this final brown color sort of be your tool to really help complete the pattern as a whole. Once you have all of your colors laid down and you take a look at your pattern and you tell yourself, maybe there's something missing in some of these areas, maybe I went a little bit too heavy with certain colors or something like that, one final option that you have is to take your beige background color and go back in with some of that Digi Camo stencil again and lay down some of that beige on top. So that's what I did right here. I looked at the pattern and I said there's a little bit too much of these other colors, the browns and greens, and I need some more beige in that area. So you can take your background color, which we technically didn't use with the stencil, and do that on top of some areas to get some of that peeking through again. Now let's go ahead and pull back some of this tape and begin hand painting some of our other solid panels. For hand painting some of these panels, my go-to brushes are going to be the Princeton Select series, and for colors like this that aren't overly saturated or anything like that, these are going to cover up pretty easily since they have a lot of light gray or white mixed into them. So I'm hoping to have these types of colors done roughly within 4 coats or so. In order to paint our tongue tag, we're going to be mixing in a fabric medium directly into our paint. This is going to be done at roughly a 1-to-1 ratio, and you want to make sure that you're doing some heat setting for this in between coats in order to really retain some of that factory softness. And for the tiny little Jumpman that we have here on a Jordan 1 tongue tag, this is definitely one of my favorite times to test out our toothpick method. So go ahead and give that a try if you haven't already. I want to include a tiny little US Army stencil on the back heel here, so what I'm going to do is first lay down the positive portion of my stencil just to make sure that I'm able to get that placement correct. Once I have that covered up and the positive portion of our stencil removed, I can then begin by filling in some of our beige background. Once we have that beige solid, we can then lay in the text portion of the stencil along with the outer stroke, and then we're going to do that same beige color directly on top of this, which is really going to help prevent any bleeding once we eventually lay down the black on top, which is going to be our next step. This way, if any color leaks underneath this stencil where we're filling in text, it's going to be our beige color rather than that black. Once I've gone back and checked and we have all of the areas of our shoe completely done that we want to have a clean matte look, we can go ahead and begin applying our matte finisher. I'm going to be using the Liquid Kicks matte finisher for this job. The next step in our process, once we've given plenty of dry time to all of our painted areas, is to now tape everything off except for the areas where we're going to be doing a black Digi Camo, which we are then going to be hitting with the high gloss finish. You really want to make sure that you take the time to tape these up properly because we definitely don't want any of our black or the high gloss finish leaking onto any of our panels that we are already completely done with. So for our black Digi Camo pattern, I'm going for a relatively muted look. I'm going to be using different shades of dark gray. I really don't want this to stand out anywhere near as much as our back panels, so I'm not going to be using colors like white or even a light gray, which would make this Digi Camo pattern just a lot stronger. I want this to be a little bit more subtle. Once we have that pattern complete, we're then going to do 2 coats of our Liquid Kicks gloss finisher. After we removed all of the tape from these, thankfully everything lined up nice and clean. We didn't end up with any of that gloss finisher on any of our matte parts. And there's actually a cool little tool that I want to show you guys that I'll use sometimes when I need to be extra precise with my taping. In this case, I would have had to get kind of creative if I ended up with any of the high gloss on some of these matte panels. So this one is still taped, so I can kind of show you. There's this tool that comes with your vinyl cutter. If you ever pick up a vinyl cutter, it's almost like a little spatula, and it's very thin at the end. And what's very cool about this is it works great for really tucking in your tape. So right here around the toe box, I'm really able to press it underneath those panels. Right here near the eyelet panels, I'm able to really tuck it in. It works really good, and it really helped keep everything nice and tight on this other pair. I didn't get any leaks of where my gloss is. So I actually got this tip from my buddy Dwayne from iRock Custom, so thank you for that, Dwayne. This is a cool little tool to have lying around anytime you need to be incredibly precise with your taping. Now that we have them completely done, come outside, try to decide what we're gonna do for the photo set. We thought that for a camo theme, it'd be pretty cool to go for kind of something heavily textured, just kind of come outside and sort of start to see what you have in your surrounding area. So we're using the concrete that I have in my porch. We're gonna be using the brick of the house to just kind of help build up that texture, create a really cool fitting background for something like this. Some other ideas that came to mind was potentially just doing kind of like a holding up shot up against the brick. But I think that all these rocks and some of this little greenery and kind of the old leaves at this point will look really cool with the Digi Camo theme like this. And all of these and kind of the poses that we do, things that we talk about when it comes to photography, just having fun with it, how it's an extension of the artwork and of the story itself, are things that we cover in our free PDF guide that we'll have linked down below. If you guys haven't checked it out already, the DCF guide, a beginner's guide to sneaker photography, definitely check it out if you haven't already. So super pleased with not only how the shoes came out, but I think that those pictures that Jason took looked absolutely great. One thing that we really wanted to hit home on with those is how easy it is to do. All we did was step outside. Those were done directly in my front yard, just using my porch and my house as a background, just playing up texture, looking for cool surroundings, and really trying to give your work a premium look. Premium product, premium photography, premium pricing, the same things that we always preach. They go a long way, and I promise that if you guys start to take your photography a little bit more serious, it's only going to improve your artwork as a whole and the story that you're conveying out into the world, because the story doesn't end when the artwork does. Now you need to continue to tell the story through your photography. So if anybody's really been riding with us for a long time, you'll know that we've actually done a Digi Camo video in the past. Within our first probably 4 to 6 months of here on YouTube, we did a bunch of 2-minute Tuesdays on a couple cool patterns, and Digi Camo was one of them. But we knew it was time to revisit this theme, do it kind of in a longer format. I know that I myself have definitely improved in being able to try to not only convey my message, but hopefully I've become a better teacher over all these years on YouTube and through all of these tutorials. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this longer format tutorial. Be sure to let us know in the comments below if you dig something like this, where we're really trying to include all the steps, not kind of just doing a super short tutorial that's, only 2 minutes, or little 4-minute videos. If you really enjoy some longer format stuff like this, be sure to let us know below. We really appreciate your guys' continued support here on YouTube. It's been a heck of a journey, really taking YouTube serious for the past 3 years. So thank you guys so much for your continued support. Be sure to go ahead and give this video a like if you haven't already. Make sure you're subscribed, and everybody get out there and just create.